Today, Jesus is talking to us about a great banquet. So I wanted to ask you guys a question. If you were invited to a great banquet, or if you were hosting a banquet or something like that, what would you want served? Hot dogs, of course. Ron wants hot dogs. What? Bratwurst sermon? Lobster? Steak? We're starting down here, right, with the hot dogs, and we're kind of creeping up. Lobster and steak. Yeah, you kind of want something good, right, if you're going to a banquet. And I've had some good meals at banquets that I've been to in the past. I've had some mediocre meals at banquets I've been to in the past. But of course, the banquet that Jesus is talking about here is a little bit bigger deal than any banquet we've yet attended. This is a parable that we're looking at today. So I want to remind everyone what that means, that a parable is a story. It's not something that has literally happened. It is a story told to convey a message. And so our job reading it today is to understand the message that Jesus, number one, had for the people he was speaking to at that time in the first century, but also the message that Jesus has for us today. And one of the things we're almost always tempted to do in parables is to start assigning roles to the different characters in it. And it's something people have been doing ever since Jesus first started telling his parables 2,000 years ago. In the parable of the two lost sons and their merciful father, also known as the parable of the prodigal son, we like to say that the father represents God, the younger son is us, the older son is either us or perhaps the Pharisees. But that parable isn't so much about the people, it's about the nature of God and his willingness to forgive us and accept us back even after we've wandered away. So here in our parable of the Great Banquet, we're tempted to do the same thing. We say that the master is God, the servant is perhaps Jesus, the three representatives declining the invitation are Israel, or at least the Pharisees. Then the first group that's gathered together after those that had refused, they go out, they get together the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. They're the outcasts of Israel. They're still Israelites, but they're considered unclean, and therefore the outcasts, the outside of the righteous. And then the last group that's gathered, people like to say, those ones on the roads and the country lanes that were brought together, they're the Gentiles, everyone outside of the Israelites. But if we see it that way, it can cause some problems for us. Because if the master represents God, then it leads us to think that the Gentiles, the last group that was gathered out on the roads and the country lanes, it makes us think that the Gentiles were an afterthought for God. Only after the outcast Israelites, the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame, only after they were gathered and there was still room left at the banquet, then did the master say, go gather the others. There's still room, so let's fit them in. This would indicate to us, if the master is God, that God didn't really have a plan for the salvation of the Gentiles. But God did have it all planned out from the beginning. The whole saving the Gentiles thing didn't just spring up on him. He just didn't say one day, oh, wait a minute, I got all these other people I got to figure out. God knew what he was going to do because in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. We were not an afterthought for God. He knew what he was going to do. Let us not so much look at the people in the parables, but let us look at the actions of the people in the parables. It's a really fine line, right? Doesn't it kind of seem like that? But the parables make a lot more sense if we look at it from that perspective, if we focus on the actions. Again, remember, these are not real people. This is a story being told to convey a message. There is no master, there is no servant, there is no guy that bought a field, there is no guy that bought oxen, there is no guy that got married. If they were to represent others, the master representing God, the servant Jesus, the people in the story are imperfect. Meaning, if the master is God and the master in our story is imperfect, that tells us that God is imperfect. And why would we worship and dedicate our lives to an imperfect deity? So don't worry so much about assigning roles to the people, to the characters in our parable. Let's discover the point that Jesus is making. This parable, along with many other parables, is in response to a comment made by someone who was eating with Jesus. Luke 14:15 says, "When one of those at the table with him heard this, he said to Jesus, 'Blessed is the one who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God.'" Blessed is the one who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God. But what prompted this man to say that? So as we talk about a lot, what is our word to remember when we're reading Scripture? Context. You guys are learning something. This is great. So we go back to the very beginning of Luke 14. Verse 1 says, "One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched." So the setting for our parable today is that Jesus is eating at the home of a prominent Pharisee. This does not mean that the only people there are Pharisees, but the meal is being hosted by a Pharisee. And so we can safely assume that there are no quote-unquote unclean people there, since being a good Pharisee, following the law, he would not keep company with such people. No unclean people, no Gentiles there. So keep that in mind as we explore our parable today. And then right before we get to our parable, Jesus says this. Then Jesus said to his host, "When you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back so that you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." And then just before this, Jesus speaks of a wedding feast. So we're in this theme here in Luke 14 of banquets, of feasts, of parties, of festivals, of whatnot. When Jesus says you don't invite people to parties that can repay you, instead invite those that can never repay you, the room's probably a little bit dark from that. It's probably brought the mood down a little bit. This isn't something this group is used to hearing. You invite people to a party so they'll invite you to their party. That's what they usually do. And with that, one of the guys at the table, likely wanting to lighten the mood a bit, says where we started. "Blessed is the one who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God." We need to understand what he means by this before we get into our parable. That's why context is so important. There's a belief that comes from chapter 25 of Isaiah, of this great banquet that'll occur when we are with God, referred to in a lot of places as the eschatological banquet. Can you guys all say that with me? Perfect, great. You probably don't need to know that word unless you're on Jeopardy, right? Eschatology, referring to the end times, for us when Jesus returns, is considered eschatology. So I want to read to you from Isaiah 25. "On this mountain, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats and the finest of wines. On this mountain he will destroy the shroud that enfolds all peoples, the sheet that covers all the nations. He will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. He will remove his people's disgrace from all the earth. The Lord has spoken. In that day they will say, 'Surely this is our God. We trusted in him and he saved us. This is the Lord. We trusted in him. Let us rejoice and be glad in his salvation.'" So our guy back in Luke at this meal with Jesus is meaning it's going to be so great when we are all with God eating that promised feast in his kingdom. Anybody ever watch College Game Day on ESPN Saturday mornings every once in a while? So you guys know there's a guy on there called Lee Corso, if you guys watch it. Well, anyway, at the end of the episode each week, they do picks. So Michigan, Ohio State, who's going to win? And they go through all the guys, and Ohio State's going to win. And who's North Dakota State or South Dakota State? And they better all pick NDSU, otherwise there's going to be trouble, right? But Lee Corso, every once in a while, he'll disagree with the previous pick. And he has this very specific way of doing it. And Lee Corso always does this. He goes, "Not so fast, my friend. Not so fast, my friend." And that's what Jesus is doing here in this parable. Right before, in this parable, our anonymous guy says, "The kingdom banquet is going to be so great. I cannot wait to be there with all you guys. We're going to feast, and it's going to be wonderful." And Jesus comes in and says, "You think you're going to be at that banquet? Not so fast, my friend." That's where Jesus starts telling this parable. Jesus replied, "A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.'" In first century Palestine, which is when and where this takes place, again, understanding the context of when and where and to whom it was said helps us understand the meaning of it. So in first century Palestine, there would actually be two invitations to a banquet. The first would be to tell someone that they were invited, and the second would be to tell them it was time to come since the meal was ready. So why two invitations? Let's compare this to something modern. This is the registration form. This was just a good thing to compare it to. This is a registration form for our biennial in a couple of weeks. And if you zoom in on part of it, it says, "Please respond by September 12th. Why do we respond by September 12th? The banquet's not until the 17th and 18th. Food. So they know how much food to get, right? Because, well, I can't just show up and expect them to have a meal for me if I'm going to participate in that stuff. You guys ever seen this on a wedding invitation or a birthday invitation or anything like that? RSVP. What does it mean? Reply. Does anybody know the actual French behind this, by the way? Sure. Répondez s'il vous plaît. Respond, please. Please respond. That's all it means. RSVP means please respond. So why do you have to respond to a wedding invitation? It's so they know how much food to get, right? So in the first century, they needed to know this as well. They needed to know how much food to prepare. In the first century, how many animals they needed to kill and to prepare for this feast. In the first century, time wasn't quite as absolute as it is to us today. In some parts of the world today, and frankly, some parts of the U.S. today, time is a lot more flexible. But here, generally, if we say, well, we're starting at 10:30, we're starting at 10:30. For better or worse, that's just how we are. So today, if you get an invitation to a birthday party on Friday at 7 p.m., what time does the party start? 7 p.m. There's always got to be one person that shows up way too early when nothing's ready to go. But back in the time of Jesus, the first invitation was to confirm that the person was coming, but a specific time wasn't yet given to show up to that party. So the second invitation would say, now is the time to come. So that's what's happening when the servant goes out and tells these people, hey, it's time to come to the banquet. Now, everyone that was invited and said they'd be there, they start making excuses. And Jesus gives us 3 of the excuses used. Remember, this is a parable, so this is all that we need to have. This is all the information we need to have to understand the message Jesus is giving us. So we have 3 excuses. First excuse is, I just bought a field and I need to go see it. Please excuse me. The second is, I just bought 5 yoke of oxen, which is 10 oxen, and I need to go try them out. Please excuse me. I just got married. I won't be coming. The first 2 say, well, I did this, so I need to do this. Please excuse me. The third one says, I did this, so I'm not coming. Let's just look for a moment at those excuses. So of these 3 excuses, would someone really buy a field without looking at it first? Would someone really buy 10 oxen without testing them out first? Would someone really accept an invitation to a banquet knowing they're going to be married at the time and feeling that disqualifies them from attending the banquet? Now, perhaps one would buy a field without looking at it if they knew the seller. Perhaps one would buy 5 yoke of oxen without testing them first if they trusted the seller. And there's an exemption in Deuteronomy for a man that is engaged to be married or is just married. Deuteronomy chapter 20. The officers shall say to the army, has anyone built a new house and not yet begun to live in it? Let him go home, or he may die in battle, and someone else may begin to live in it. Has anyone planted a vineyard and not begun to enjoy it? Let him go home, or he may die in battle, and someone else enjoy it. Has anyone become pledged to a woman and not married her? Let him go home, or he may die in battle, and someone else marry her. And in chapter 24, if a man is recently married, he must not be sent to war or have any other duty laid on him. For 1 year he is to be free to stay at home and bring happiness to the wife he has married. So there's some exemptions in Deuteronomy, but those are really specific exemptions for military service. It's not a law saying that a man can't go to a banquet. The man wouldn't be going away for a long period to some place where he could be killed. He's going to a party, and he should be back that night or maybe the next day. If the person did need to inspect that field, it didn't need to happen that night. If the person did need to try out his 10 new oxen, it didn't need to happen that night. None of these are valid reasons to be legitimately excused from attending a banquet, that by accepting that first invitation, it obliged them to attend. I've spoken before about perhaps the most dangerous word a Christian can use. Do you guys remember what it is? But. Of course, it depends on the context of the statement. I know I'm a Christian, but. I know I shouldn't do this, but. I know I should do that, but. I know I shouldn't think this way, but. I know Jesus says this, but. I know God is telling me to do this, but. That's what's happening with these excuses. I know I said I'd be there, but I need to go see my new field. I know I said I'd be there, but I need to try out my new oxen. I know I said I'd be there, but I got married. And I don't know, maybe she's a little hard on the guy. I don't know. Again, since this is a parable, it isn't so much what the excuses are, but the fact that none of them are good excuses to miss this banquet. Now the servant returns to his master and tells of all these excuses. The master says to go into the streets and alleys of the town and bring the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. Now that should trigger something in your mind. It would have in the minds of the men sitting around this table. They were listening to Jesus as they ate. He just told them before starting this parable, and before the comment, blessed is the one who will eat the feast in the kingdom of God, Jesus says when you throw a party, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Now that is exactly what the master does in Jesus' parable. Why are they to be invited? Why this group? Not so much that they don't have excuses, but this is a group of people that can never repay what they are about to get. The poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame can never repay the kindness that the master, in throwing this banquet, is about to show them. Can you think of another incredible act of kindness shown to us that we can never repay? Jesus' death on the cross. There's nothing we can do to repay that incredible gift. So they're all invited. They're all at the table. They're ready to go. But there's still more room. So the master tells the servant, then go to the country roads and compel the people there to come to my banquet. Now this is one of those dangerous verses in Scripture that if understood improperly can lead to humans doing some terrible things. The master says compel them to come. Over the centuries, many people have read this to mean compel them by force to come. And that they've taken that as justification to do some terrible things in history. Just a few examples: the Spanish Inquisition. of the 15th century. Jews and Muslims specifically were tortured if they refused to confess Jesus as Lord. So-called witch trials at various times in history, most famously probably the Salem witch trials of the 17th century in the United States, or colonial America. The treatment of Native Americans, forced boarding schools. The avowed policy of the United States was, quote, kill the Indian, save the man. There's religious overtones to all of this. But that is in no way what is meant here when Jesus, through the Master, says, compel them to come. The people being invited to the banquet now know that they have absolutely no way to ever repay the Master for the hospitality he plans to show them. They know that they can never repay him for this. So by that, they are socially obligated to refuse the invitation because they can't repay the host. They feel they are unworthy to come to that banquet table. By compelling them to come, they're being told that it doesn't matter that you can't repay the Master. Your presence is welcome. Please come and enjoy this banquet. You are not unworthy of this gift, but you still must accept the invitation. The message with this parable is quite encompassing. Jesus sits and eats with several men, some of them Pharisees, all of them believing that they are followers of the law. They believe they are on the right path with God. One speaks up and says, how great will it be? How great will it be, guys, when we're all sitting around that great table with God that one day, eating with him, that great feast the Lord God has planned for us. But what does Jesus say? Not so fast, my friend. You may think you're on the right path, but you haven't yet accepted the true invitation. They don't realize the true invitation is sitting at the table with them at that moment. Jesus is telling them that it isn't because one is a Pharisee or because one keeps the law that they are saved. It isn't because of who your parents are that you're saved. It isn't because your son becomes a priest or your daughter becomes a pastor. It doesn't matter if you have gone to church every week of your life or if you faithfully tithe. It doesn't matter what country you're from or what social groups you belong to. It isn't being a Baptist or a Catholic or a Lutheran. In fact, it isn't religion that saves us at all. If someone doesn't accept the invitation to join at the table, if someone doesn't accept the invitation to attend the banquet, that spot will go to someone else. The invitation is to come into a saving relationship with a living, loving God who sent his only Son to earth to die in place of me, to die in place of you, to forgive our sins. Now, this doesn't mean that there are a limited number of spots in heaven. I don't believe that. It doesn't mean that we need to respond multiple times to God's invitation. Remember, this is a parable. It is showing us the nature of things. What it is telling us is that if one does not respond, thinking that they're good based on some other criteria, they will miss the banquet. They will not be saved. Jesus is eating with a bunch of guys that think they're good to go, but they're not. They're sitting there not realizing that the invitation is sitting there with them. Have you responded to the invitation? Or are you relying on something else to get you into heaven? Respond to the invitation. Yes, Lord, I will be there. And don't make excuses when that invitation comes. Rely only on Jesus. Amen.